Welcome to another episode of Inflection. I am Brian Berletic. Joining me as always is Angelo Giuliano. Hello, Angelo.
Hi, Brian. Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Yes, great to have you. Today we're going to be talking about the Western propaganda war on China and how it's kind of spreading and how it's kind of spawning a new tentacle. And this tentacle is reaching into Afghanistan right as the US is leaving. And it focuses on the Uyghurs and this supposed genocide the US claims China is carrying out. We'll get into all of that, but there's a couple of, I would say, semi-related news stories that I think we should go over also. And one of them is in regards to Afghanistan. So why don't we just jump right into that? US Vice President Kamala Harris meets with Singapore officials to begin Asia visit. So this was Kamala Harris traveling around Southeast Asia, but I mean, it was a very limited trip. She went to Singapore, Vietnam, and maybe the Philippines. I'm not sure about that, but the Secretary of Defense did go to the Philippines recently. So these are the areas of focus right now for the US. And what are they trying to do? They're trying to recruit all of these countries into an anti-China front. And if we look at AP, what we're going to do is we're going to look at AP, and then we're going to look at this article from Chinese state media, the Global Times. We're going to compare and contrast. So this one is talking about how the US wants to cooperate with Singapore on combating cyber threats, tackling climate change, addressing the COVID-19 pandemic, and alleviating supply chain issues. The announcement coincides with Vice President Kamala Harris's visit to the region as part of the Biden administration's efforts to counter Chinese influence there. That's kind of a strange way to put it. They're going to counter Chinese influence where? In Singapore. What are they talking about? They're talking about Singapore's relationship with China and Southeast Asia's relationship with China. And what the US is just openly saying is they're going to counter. They're going to get in there and interfere. They're going to try to reduce those ties and try to pull them into America's orbit. You've said a lot about this, Angelo. Before we go deeper into the AP article and then compare with the Global Times, you've said a lot about what the U.S. is up to in Southeast Asia, and especially in regards to Vietnam. So what's your take on this initially?
Well, I think it's showing clearly the deep ignorance when it comes to the region. Kamala Harris has absolutely no idea the position of Singapore. Singaporean politicians are amongst the most able. Really, they have a tradition of having the best politicians and the best managers to manage Singapore, and they're very pragmatic. Keep in mind that Singapore population, the majority are Chinese, and they have deep relationship with the mainland. And they're very pragmatic. Basically, it's about doing business with your neighbor and managing the relationship between China and the US. So they'll never take side. The same for Vietnam. They know that how the US has used many countries around the world, and whenever they don't need you, they drop you. I mean, the last example is Ukraine, and see what happened in Afghanistan. So it shows clearly there's complete ignorance, and they know when the Prime Minister of Singapore is receiving Kamala Harris just out of politeness, but I think it's those pressure might backfire, because the last thing they like is just to have someone that wants to put pressure on yourself. They don't want that. So every time they push, it's backfiring, and they're getting closer. In many cases, they getting even more closer to China. At least it's not very visible, because getting closer with China is mainly in terms of trade. And we talked about this. Money is power. There's one thing about when you discuss, we are good friends, and it's a lip service, right? But when it's trade, that's the most important. This is where it's hurting the US, is that most of those countries in Southeast Asia, their number one partner is China, and that is what is hurting.
Absolutely. Just the trade, the fact that the U.S. has nothing to offer except ensnaring them in this growing conflict with China, that no one in the region in any conceivable way will benefit from. And again, this is the whole driving factor behind the U.S. Building up these opposition groups, because no one currently in power in Southeast Asia is interested in this. And it was interesting, Angelo, that you said use, because AP, if you dig all the way down in the article, almost to the very, very bottom, they say Singapore's foreign minister said in a recent interview that Singapore will be useful, but we will not be made use of in its relations with both countries, the US and China. And the nation's prime minister previously warned the United States against pursuing an aggressive approach to China, because this is going to create havoc for the entire region, including nations like Singapore and also Vietnam. Even these countries that are portrayed as being at odds with China in a way do not want an actual conflict with China. They don't want it. And I just thought it was interesting that you have to go through all of this in AP, and then the Global Times, the headline says Singapore draws line between being useful and being made use of. And I think that is the crux of US Vice President Kamala Harris's visit to Singapore. I think that is the main theme that came out of it, was she went there, like many before her, to try to recruit Singapore and other nations in the region in this anti-China front. And no one wants it. No one benefits from this. And the US has nothing else to offer except for this fake security alliance against a fake threat that nobody else sees. Right, Angelo? Am I imagining this?
Let me add just one more thing, because a lot of people they have a short time memory when it comes to history. Not long ago, Vietnam was still under sanctions from the US. Remember the deal between the US and Vietnam was that we are going to open up our economy, and we are going to start to do some reforms, going towards some type of democratization. So they play the fine line. So they know what it means to be under sanctions. So they won't be fooled. They won't be fooled. They know that the US is trying to use them, and there's no incentive. It's all threats. What is the incentive? Most of the trade is done with China. Are you coming up to buy more Vietnamese goods or so on? No. It's just threats of sanctions, and it's not working. People. Threats might work one time, two times, but actually, what happens is that there are countermeasures, and countermeasures are only going to damage the US.
Absolutely, and a lot of what the US does has an impact on the short term. And just like you said, these countermeasures are thinking long term. When a country is faced with sanctions from the United States, they might even buckle, but they know in the long term, if they want any degree of freedom and self-determination, they need to come up with alternatives. They work on these alternatives. And then once they're in place, the next time the US threatens them, they don't care, because they have this alternative already in place. Now, let's go to Afghanistan. This is just absolutely ridiculous. So this is actually from USA Today, but it's in Yahoo News. Biden said US would hunt down Kabul airport attackers. A day later, a drone strike killed 2 ISIS-K targets. So this is Joe Biden keeping his word and hunting down the ISIS-K attackers. This is, if anyone believes this, I don't know what to say at this point. How is it possible that the US saw the attack, investigated it, found out who was behind it, then found where they were, and then was able to organize a drone strike in less than one day? How is this possible? And if you read the details of this attack, it was one of these over-the-horizon strikes, which means it wasn't even a drone strike from within Afghanistan or even a neighboring country. It was from most likely Qatar in the Middle East, in the Persian Gulf, flew all the way to Afghanistan. The range of these Reaper drones is really, like, that's pushing the limit, unless they have some extended range version that can go there and back that I don't know about. or there was some sort of refueling. Right before the show, I asked you, Angela, like, we've never heard of a Reaper doing an aerial refuel, but it's who knows? A benefit of the doubt, let's just say that's what they did. But still, if you understand how these drone strikes are organized, because there's no human flying that drone in the drone. They're back at a base somewhere, like in Qatar or Langley, Virginia, or wherever. So they have to observe the target for quite some time to make sure it's the right target and to make sure there's no civilians around. So how did they do all of this in less than a day? It's begs belief. Angelo, your initial impression, there's a lot we're actually going to get into regarding this story. But Angelo?
Well, just look at the speech of Biden. You know, it looks like those Hollywood movies. It's like John Wayne, Western movies. We will hunt you down. We will make you pay. I mean, this whole showmanship. And I want to add something. You know, the discrepancies when you look at, when you have those bombs, some of those bombs, they cost like $40,000 US, and they're actually bombing tents that cost $100. You see the disproportion. The disproportion of having $2 trillion being spent on Afghanistan, that's the equivalence of giving $50,000 US to each Afghani. It doesn't make any sense. If only a very small proportion of those funding, 10%, was poured into the economy of Afghan people, it would change completely the whole economy. It's, you know, what is the GDP of Afghanistan? It's I don't know. I mean, it's less than 100 billion. I don't know. It's extremely small, and then spending $2 trillion doesn't make any sense. It's just enriching the MIC, military industrial complex. That's all it's doing. It's just recycling money. It's a transfer. It's you know, this war on terror. We are talking about around $6 trillion US of spending over 20 years. It's only a recycling of money. It's a transfer of wealth. It's one of the biggest transfer of wealth in human history. We are talking about taking away $6 trillion US from US taxpayers to whom? To the wealthiest people, to the elites, to the military industrial complex. And again, when we are talking about the US, again, it's not the people. I think if they are victims here, is the American people. They are victims of their own system.
Absolutely. And I think this latest drone strike is the perfect example of just how demented U.S. foreign policy it has been. And if people haven't realized it until now, this is a good example to kind of highlight it. And just like you were saying, I mean, this is actually a good topic for another episode. The difference between U.S. and Chinese reconstruction in Afghanistan, because China, actually, I've been doing some research. They've already started building stuff in Afghanistan. So I think that deserves its own episode. But getting back to this strike, this is U.S. Central Command, and they're saying they conducted an over-the-horizon counterterrorism operation against an ISIS-K planner. Again, how did they know where this guy was so quickly? And they said the unmanned airstrike occurred in the Nangarhar province of Afghanistan. So this is east of Kabul. Initial indications are that we killed the target. How would they know? We know of no civilian casualties. Well, knowing of no civilian casualties and there being no civilian casualties are two entirely different things. And I think I showed you this before the show. I've showed a lot of people this, as a matter of fact. Daniel Hale is the man who exposed the U.S. drone program and how I think it was 9 out of 10 people killed by these strikes had nothing to do with terrorism. They were just collateral damage. And what did he get for exposing this? He got thrown in jail. And what did the U.S. do to rectify the inadequacies of the drone campaign, the drone program? Nothing that I'm aware of. And so when Central Command says they didn't kill any civilians, how do we know that? And someone was just showing me, and I have to confirm this, that at first they said they hit a car. Now it turned out it was a house. Now it turns out there might have been civilian casualties. So ridiculous. So this over-the-horizon drone strike, like I said, if you go to, actually, let's take a look at this one. This is before this whole incident unraveled. This was the Washington Post talking about over-the-horizon operations, because the U.S. is withdrawing from Afghanistan. So if they want to kill people in Afghanistan, how do they do this? They don't have a base in Afghanistan. Well, they use bases in Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. So this drone strike likely came from Qatar. Qatar, according to the U.S. government, it was identified by the U.S. government as a state sponsor of ISIS. So this is an anti-ISIS drone mission launched from the territory of a known state sponsor of ISIS. This is how demented U.S. foreign policy is. So this is from 2016. In leaked email, Clinton claimed Saudi and Qatari governments fund ISIS. Hillary Clinton at the time was the U.S. Secretary of State. This is a very senior leader in the U.S. government. And it says here, we need to use our diplomatic and more traditional intelligence assets to bring pressure on the governments of Qatar and Saudi Arabia, which are providing clandestine financial and logistic support to ISIL and other radical Sunni groups in the region. And of course, Angelo, you and I know that the way this works is the U.S. was sponsoring ISIS also, and they were laundering that support through Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and others, including Turkey. They were laundering that support through because ISIS are fanatics. So the U.S. can't directly deal with ISIS. They have to deal indirectly through these regional allies. And so, again, today, they're launching drone strikes from Qatar, identified by the U.S. government as a sponsor of ISIS in an anti-ISIS drone mission. What do you think about that, Angelo?
Well, it's always about hypocrisy. I mean, we all know this history of funding terrorist groups started a long time ago. So what we're seeing here is just a repetition. It's just this whole thing about still trying to justify this war on terror. Because keep in mind that the presence in the Middle East of U.S. Army troops is based on the war on terror. So they need to have this enemy, ISIS. They call it all kinds of names, but the origin of the funding was U.S. funding. The Mujahideen, they were fighting against the USSR that became later on many different groups. Among them, Al Qaeda were funded by the U.S. So it's like Frankenstein. It's this monster that you create that actually backfire. But maybe they need that. Again, keep in mind that the USSR, the fall of the USSR should have been the end of NATO. NATO was supposed to counterbalance the Warsaw Pact, the USSR bloc. And now that it fell apart, they had to find a new enemy. The new enemy were the Middle East, the terrorists and so on, and what is next? Russia. What is next? China. The military industrial complex need to always invent an enemy, and look at the directions they betrayed Russia. It was never supposed to expand. It's encircling China and Russia. Who's the aggressor? Russia and China have together 3 or 4 army bases around the world, while the NATO forces over 800 bases. It's just a waste, and so much waste of money. If you dig into how much waste of money there is, F-35, how much? We're talking about almost $1 trillion of development.
Over $1 trillion now.
Over that, yeah. And imagine what this money could do to the U.S. I made a comparison. The war on terror is around 6.4 trillion. There are various figures, but let's say 6.4 trillion. It could have built 2 times what China did for infrastructure, railway lines, 150,000 kilometers. Imagine what it could do to the U.S. It could eradicate poverty in the U.S.
Easily. And universal health care, and build a city on Mars if they wanted to. I mean, this just astronomical waste on slaughtering people all around the globe for power and control. It's just absolutely ridiculous. Was there anything else you wanted to say about this strike in Afghanistan? Because I think what you just said springboards perfectly into our main topic. Go ahead, Angelo.
Just those whistleblowers. Keep in mind, I'd like to make a parallel. It might be a bit extreme, but like those whistleblowers would be like that we're putting them in prison. And I think we look back in history. Maybe one day when the U.S. empire will collapse, it will be like the Nazi, this silent majority accepting that those crimes against humanity are being done and not saying anything. The same as the Nazi people being very silent and looking at the atrocities and thinking this was normal. And it's a scandal. We look back with shame with all those whistleblowers being put in jail. I mean, Julian Assange. I mean, where are those journalists? He's the only one doing the real job. Where are those journalists? Just announcing this madness. It's madness. Putting the contribution of those people when it comes to information to stopping war is huge, and they're being put in jail. And I think we look back at history with shame.
Absolutely. And I'm going to put the link to this Gray Zone article about Daniel Hale and the letter that he wrote to the judge that imprisoned him. And it, you say, he is a hero. We know about how destructive and murderous the U.S. drone program is because of Daniel Hale, not because the U.S. came clean with it on their own. What did they do when this came out? They threw him in jail, and they're still doing it. If you read Daniel Hale's account of the U.S. drone program and what he disclosed, you know that this is impossible. And we know that these so-called journalists, just like you said, where are the journalists? They're here trying to make Joe Biden look like John Wayne. He somehow found and killed the perpetrators of the international airport bombing overnight. Ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And it's an insult to everyone's intelligence. And it's just them just killing people to score political points. They have no idea who they killed in eastern Afghanistan the day after the airport attack. They have no idea. Probably just innocent civilians or people that they were tracking and could have killed all along, and they didn't. And then you got the airport bombing. Either way, it bodes poorly for the U.S. But I think this is a perfect springboard into the main topic, which is how the West's propaganda war against China, and specifically about Xinjiang and the Uyghurs, is mutating and springing out this tentacle that's now reaching into Afghanistan. So this was from the BBC. You have to read the whole thing. Afghanistan's Uyghurs fear the Taliban, and now China too. And so what does this article try to lay out? First of all, they repeat all of the lies the West has been telling about Xinjiang, China, the situation with the Uyghurs. They're talking about mass detention, surveillance, forced labor. These are all things that have been completely debunked or put into proper context. And then, according to some accounts, so this is like the BBC even admitting that we're not really so sure about these lies. We're going to put some distance between ourselves and these lies. Sterilization, torture, and rape. And that's because people have debunked these claims as well, because the people making these claims have changed their story multiple times, and they've been caught in lies. And so this is why the BBC still wants to throw it in there, but they want to kind of put a disclaimer in there. And now they're saying that China is going to use the Belt and Road to dangle over the Taliban's head and get them to hand over all the Uyghurs, because China is just obsessed with rounding up every last Uyghur on earth for no apparent reason. Nowhere in this article, Angelo, maybe you saw it, but I didn't see anywhere in this article where they talked about the very real terrorist problem China faced in Xinjiang because of Uyghur extremists and separatists. Did you see anything in there mentioned about that, Angelo?
No, absolutely nothing. I think the problem is that very often those Western media, they take a snapshot and there's an agenda. It's always the agenda. Now it's clear that it's an anti-Chinese agenda, but it's not, never do they take the perspective, put this into the perspective of what happened before. It's not, if you want to judge something, you need to put into perspective of what happened before, who's funding those terrorist groups, for what purpose, and people don't take the time to look at all those American policies. We're talking about thousands of pages. You need to go through that and to see what is the purpose. I mean, it's encircling China, and there's a strategy, many different ways. You disrupt the Belt and Road Initiative. You disrupt some policies which are poverty alleviation. You call it a different way, because keep in mind that what is China doing is what should you do if you want to stop terrorism, to stop the radicals? You take care of poverty, because this is what it's very easy to indoctrinate people when they are under poverty. They feel marginalized, and they're very easy target. Low level of education, that's very easy. Once you give education to people, then people are being empowered, and they can think for themselves. While you can use religion, and sadly, I think Muslims are being targeted, and are being the useful idiots here. I mean, a minority of them. Just to lead them into fights, and ultimately it's they're fighting against themselves. At the end of the day, Muslims are killing Muslims, and it's about a fight of the radicals versus the large majority of peaceful Muslims. And so it's very sad. So look at what China did. China started to educate Xinjiang people, Uyghurs. When they talk about sterilization programs, in reality, life expectancy increased. The Uyghurs, the minorities in Xinjiang, the growth of those minorities was much bigger than the majority of Han Chinese. There is actually, in reality, there's what we call positive discrimination, meaning that they have access to higher education, better access to higher education than Han Chinese. You see, it's very competitive school education system in China. It's very hard to get into the best universities. If you are from a minority, you can get into those universities. Another thing is that, minorities in China, they were not under the one-child policy, so they could have more children. So how can you tell that they were oppressed? In reality, if you go to China, you will realize that the minorities in China are the pride of China. They cherish those minorities, and they tend to have much more rights than Han Chinese. So it's just absurd. But it requires people just to go to China and look for yourself.
Look at the money. On the money, they have the different scripts of all the different ethnic minorities on the money, including for Uyghurs. So if they hated and wanted to exterminate all Uyghurs, culturally genocide or literally genocide, whichever narrative the West wants to go with on a day-to-day basis, why would they do that? Why would they include it on their own money that everyone looks at every single day, every step that they take every day? You made a lot of good points about what's actually going on in Xinjiang, and you mentioned terrorism, and this terrorism is part of separatism, and this is backed by the U.S. And I want to show people this. If you go to this article, this BBC article, and you check the sources, and they will not tell you who these sources are. They just mention them and pretend like they're credible, and you shouldn't question them. But if you do some digging, you're going to see just how bad it is. So The first one that popped out to me was Uyghur Human Rights Project. Uyghur Human Rights Project. They don't tell you anything at all about what this organization is, because if they did, a red flag would go up right away, because it's funded by the US government through the National Endowment for Democracy. It's the first one on the list right here, Uyghur Human Rights Project. And if you go to their website, and I like how they kind of counterfeit the UN style here to kind of make it look extra official, even though it has absolutely nothing to do with the UN. I like that, though. It's a nice touch. And if you go down here, what is the Uyghur Human Rights Project? It promotes the rights of the Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslim peoples in East Turkestan, referred to by the Chinese government as the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. So this is an organization funded by the US government that is openly separatist, referring to Xinjiang as East Turkestan. The entire planet refers to Xinjiang as Xinjiang and recognizes it as part of China. And we could just go to the United Nations' own website, the United Nations Security Council. The only time they ever mention East Turkestan is in relationship to the East Turkestan or Eastern Turkestan Islamic movement, and how it is a terrorist organization. And I want to point out this sentence right here. The Eastern Turkestan Islamic Movement is an organization which has used violence to further its aim of setting up an independent, so-called, and in quotation marks, East Turkestan within China. So this is the UN admitting and acknowledging that Xinjiang is part of China, and that East Turkestan is a creation, a fabrication of these violent terrorists, these separatists. And what does this tell us? This tells us that China had a very real armed terrorist problem in Xinjiang, and the goal was separatism. And the US, through organizations like the Uyghur Human Rights Project, or if you come down here, another NED-funded organization is the World Uyghur Congress. Where is it? Right here. If you go to their website and you come down here, they refer to Xinjiang as they're an opposition movement against Chinese occupation of East Turkestan. So again, that's two organizations the US government is funding that are openly separatist, trying to carve out territory from China, recognized by everyone on earth as part of China. This is what the US is doing today, right now.
Well, I think it's important to look at the origin of those Uyghur independence movement. There was Isa Alptekin. He was a very powerful man under the Kuomintang. The Kuomintang is the nationalist party that actually flew. They lost against the communists and they flew to Taiwan. So he was very close to the CIA. Because the Kuomintang was actually working closely with the CIA against the Japanese. And so he was the initiator. So in the 70s, before actually that Nixon met with Mao, he was actually very close to the US, and he was already starting his plan of disruption of Xinjiang. Later on, his son, Erkin Alptekin, became a CIA agent, and he spent a lot of time actually in Afghanistan, and he was working for Radio Free Asia.
The Americans discovered me, and they said, Erkin, why don't you work for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty? So 10 years there.
And he was doing a lot of propaganda, especially against the USSR in the Central Asia countries, which are Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan. And he contributed to the Balkanization of the USSR. So you see, we have at the foundation of the World Uyghur Congress a CIA agent. And out of that, you have many different entities which are all linked to the World Uyghur Congress. So you see, this whole Xinjiang independent movement is all derivatives of the CIA. It's all controlled by the CIA. It's just always the same thing. At the end of the day, it's follow the money. You can buy people with money. Erkil Alptekin, remember we had talked about this. He had a meeting with the person, the new political person that is representing the Tibetan in exile. He was clearly saying, well, if the US are going to help me. Well, in Xinjiang, there's lots of oil, there's lots of gas. If they help me to make Xinjiang independent, well, we'll share the wealth. And when he talks about the oil and gas, he doesn't say oil and gas. He says my oil, my gas.
And saying that, hey, look, you have oil, gas, and all of that. How are we going to do that? They're helping me because in case Eastern Turkestan becomes an independent country, how they would benefit from my oil and gas. That's the problem.
Oil companies being contacted, Mr. Yes, that is a fact.
Yeah.
So you see, you have people that are opportunistic, that are just there for the money, because it's all about money. Again, Erkin Aptekin has never lived in Xinjiang. He's a second generation, he's American, he doesn't care about China, about Xinjiang, about Uyghurs. He doesn't care about this. He's just another puppet.
And it's interesting that you brought up that discussion that they had and Tibet. And we remember U.S. documents admitting to all of the details of the CIA Tibetan program. That was all the way back in the 50s and 60s. And that has been ongoing up to today. And so it's no surprise that the NED, the successor of CIA-sponsored regime change, took over the funding of these separatist groups regarding Xinjiang. And I mean, the Uyghur Human Rights Program, that is based in Washington, D.C. It's not based in Xinjiang or anywhere near it. It's also interesting that you said that he was working in Afghanistan. And is that, now back to this BBC article, is that why these Uyghurs in Afghanistan are nervous? Is it because under US-occupied Afghanistan, they were playing a role in stirring up trouble in Xinjiang in this US versus China conflict? And now they're worried that they're going to face justice for that. Or is it because they read the BBC and they're scared because the BBC lies and says that China wants to hunt down every last Uyghur on earth? And now, the guy that I wanted to talk about was the other, expert that they cited is this Bradley Jardine, and they say he's an analyst who has studied China's economic and political presence abroad. An analyst for who? He's an analyst for the Wilson Center. And it says right here, as an official memorial to President Wilson, Congress supports the Wilson Center through an annual appropriation. And then they say they get extra money also, and they don't really say who it is, but we could guess that it's these corporations that fund all of these think tanks and policy centers. But isn't it interesting how every single source cited by the BBC is directly funded by the US government? And it's all part of this US and also British propaganda war against China. Now, this is an article from this year, from just 2 days ago. This is an article also from the BBC from 2014. Why is there tension between China and the Uyghurs? And you will see in this article, the BBC provide a very long list of horrific terrorist attacks carried out by Uyghur extremists in Xinjiang and beyond. And these are things that the BBC now never talks about, never mentions it. If they talk about terrorism in Xinjiang, they put it in quotation marks and say Beijing claims or alleges. So let's go through that list. But is there anything else you want to add in here real quick, Angelo, before I go? This is kind of a long list.
Yeah, it's about all those fake stories when it comes to Xinjiang. Remember when he was about Iraq, the invasion of Iraq into Kuwait, they talked about those baby into incubators, and this whole story about this girl that was actually supposed to work in the hospital, and there were like 50, 60 incubators that were thrown into the floor. Well, she was, her name was Nazira, I think. Well, she was just the daughter of the ambassador, the Kuwaiti ambassador, and she was coached by PR firm. Well, this whole thing is just repeating. When it comes to Xinjiang, we could debunk all those stories. The problem is that it's a full-time job. And we have, there are some great articles, some great research by the Gray Zone, and lots of YouTubers, like Daniel Dumbrill, he's been debunking that. But there's so many fake information, fake news. And And the problem, yeah, there's so much presence of those fake news in mainstream media. Keeping in mind that just the budget, the Congress signed a bill of 300 million US dollar for 5 years. We're talking about 1.5 billion US dollar, which is a focus on propaganda against China. So how can we fight that? We are small guys on YouTube trying to debunk, trying to expose that, and it's an unfair fight. It's very difficult. Then when it comes to I'd like to draw a parallel between the old imperialistic agenda, when we used to try to export civilization, where it's not different. It's just marketing is much better right now. It's way better. Now we exporting human rights, freedom, democracy, but it's exactly the same as what we wanted to do in the old days. In the old days, they were not civilized, and we wanted to tell them how we wanted to export or Western style way of life, but actually it was just a good tool just to oppress them, to keep them under control. But we never brought them what they needed, meaning prosperity, education. I mean, this is, if you want to export human rights, this is what you have to do. How do you do that? You build up infrastructure. You stop putting sanctions. You don't restrict. It's the help should not be tied to changes. Why would you change those people? Western hegemony has only a short time lifespan. When you look at history, it's only 200 years. How about the 2,000 years before that? India and China, they were the largest superpower. The GDP of China and India combined were 60% of the world GDP. What is happening right now is just an anomaly in the world history, because the global South, on aggregate is way bigger in terms of population than the West, and we need to accept that. We containing them, it's not viable, because every day, per capita, they are going to have to prosper. And this is, on aggregate, they are going to become the largest economies. Is it for human rights to contain the development of those people? So it's just marketing.
Not.
It's just marketing, and people, again, most of people, how they are learning about history? They watch Hollywood movies. That's how they, the people don't go into facts, don't do the homework, they don't do the research. Because people are just too busy. They're just too busy, it's and that's what we're trying to do here, is just trying to at least expose. We are not telling people how to think. We're just trying to give them facts. Okay, this is, Hollywood is one thing, but now it's facts. You cannot have a snapshot right now judging what is happening in Afghanistan if you don't go back to history.
Or Xinjiang.
Exactly.
Xinjiang.
Exactly. Why there's ISIS now in Afghanistan? Well, this is linked to the meddling 40 years ago by the US. Remember, Afghanistan was extremely modern. When there was a king in Afghanistan, and when there was the communist influence, women, when it came to women, it was a very modern society. Now imagine. Now they are telling, well, the Taliban are going to oppress the woman. Well, you know what? Why didn't you think about this 40 years ago? Because 40 years ago, it was extremely modern in Afghanistan. It was maybe backward in the countryside. It was still very traditional. People, women were wearing burqas. But when it came to cities, they were free. Women were free. So again, you need to go back to 40 years ago when it comes to Afghanistan, and same as in Xinjiang. So it's just, I just hope people just do their homework. Just dig a little bit more. It's not white and black. Yeah.
And let's help them do their homework. So we were just looking at this most recent BBC article, and not a single mention of the very real and extensive terrorism that plagued Xinjiang and beyond because of these US-backed Uyghur separatists. And I said there was this article from also from the BBC from 2014. So I'm going to read through it, and it's a little bit long. Bear with me here. China has been accused of intensifying its crackdown on the Uyghurs after street protests in the 1990s and again in the run-up to the Beijing Olympics in 2008. But things really escalated in 2009 with large-scale ethnic rioting in the regional capital, Urumqi. Am I saying that correct, Angelo? Do you know? Or
yeah, you're close. Urumqi.
Okay. Some 200 people were killed in the unrest, most of them Han Chinese, according to officials. Security was increased and many Uyghurs detained as suspects, but violence rumbled on as right groups increasingly pointed to tight control by Beijing. But of course, control would increase if the violence was increasing. The need to control it would increase. But this is what the BBC does. In June 2012, 6 Uyghurs reportedly tried to hijack a plane from Hotan to Urumqi before they were overpowered by passengers and crew. There was bloodshed in April 2013, and in June that year, 27 people died in Shanshan County after police opened fire on what state media described as an armed mob armed with knives attacking local government buildings. Establishing facts about these incidents is difficult because foreign journalists' access to the region is tightly controlled. But in recent months, there appears to have been a shift towards larger scale incidents where citizens have become the target, particularly in Xinjiang. At least 31 people were killed and more than 90 suffered injuries in May 2014 when 2 cars crashed through an Urumqi market and explosives were tossed into the crowd. China called it a violent terrorist incident. Why are they putting that in quotation marks? If that's not terrorism, what do you call cars driving into crowds and throwing bombs out the window? So again, the BBC, even when they're listing the violence, they play these games. It followed a bomb and knife attack at Urumqi's South Railway Station in April, which killed 3 and injured 79 others. In July, authorities said a knife-wielding gang attacked a police station and government offices in Yarkand, leaving 96 dead. The imam of China's largest mosque, Jume Tahir, was stabbed to death days later, again, by Uyghur extremists, separatists, killing other Uyghurs who they thought were not extreme enough. In September, about 50 died in a blast in Luntai County outside police stations, a market, and a shop. Details of both incidents are unclear, and activists have contested some accounts of incidents in state media. But these are activists, as we just showed, are literally funded by the US government and based in Washington, D.C. So they can question the incidents, and then we can question them questioning the incidents. What credibility they have. They have none. Some violence has also spilled out of Xinjiang. A March stabbing spree in Kunming in Yunnan province that killed 29 people was blamed on Xinjiang separatists, as was an October 2013 incident where a car plowed into a crowd and burst into flames in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. And then they say in response to these attacks, the authorities launched a year-long campaign against terrorism, stepping up security in Xinjiang and conducting more military drills in the region, which is only natural when you consider the scale of violence the BBC just described. And this article is from 2014. The next year, this terrorism was reached Bangkok. There was a bombing in downtown Bangkok, 20 people dead at a shrine. And when I say downtown Bangkok, I'm talking about like Bangkok's version of Times Square. This is where Uyghur extremists detonated a bomb, killed 20 people. And why? Because Bangkok extradited Uyghur terror suspects back to China after the US told them no, send them onward to Turkey, because what the US was doing was bringing these extremists through Southeast Asia to Turkey to cross over into Syria to fight Washington's dirty war against Damascus. So this was what was going on when China decided they needed to step up security in Xinjiang. They needed these vocational schools. Instead of going into Xinjiang with the military and just killing everybody, they tried to reform the people, deprogram them. If you've ever discussed anything with or seen people trying to talk to one of these extremists, they are brainwashed. They are like cult members. They need to be deprogrammed. And that's what China has been doing. This is the context. The BBC itself admitted years ago that they now omit from every single article they now write about Xinjiang, China, the Uyghurs, and now Afghanistan, and Uyghurs in Afghanistan. One last thing I want to say about this before I hand it back to you, Angelo, is remember, this is the BBC. It is British state media. They were actually the most enthusiastic and aggressive media organization promoting the war, the invasion of Iraq in 2003, the lies about weapons of mass destruction, deliberate lies. And they, up to and including to today, they literally try to cast China in the worst light possible. When I say that, I mean they open up Photoshop and they adjust the images to make everything in China look dreary. They literally grayed out trees in photos from China to try to depict it as some hellscape. This is the BBC. So when you see them omitting this context, this extremely essential context, to try to paint China as just irrationally going after Uyghurs around the globe, that's why, because this is what they do. They're liars. That's what the BBC is. They're liars. Angelo?
Yeah, just adding up one more thing is keep in mind that ETIM was present in Syria. So we talk about 5,000 combatants. The fear of China is that those ETIM combatants, terrorists, they would just come back to China. So look at what happened, those civil wars that happened.
Just a moment, Angelo. I just want to remind people that you say ETIM, that is the Eastern Turkestan Islamic Movement, mentioned by the UN Security Council as a terrorist organization who refers to Xinjiang as East Turkestan and are engaged in violent separatism. Go ahead, Angelo. I just wanted to
No, very good point. It's important to remind people, for people that are new to this. So ETIM was actually listed as a terrorist. After September 11, it was listed as a terrorist organization. And curiously, recently, they delisted. The US delisted. So it is a sign. The nature of this group, this movement hasn't changed. It's just the agenda is more of a focus towards China. So by delisting this entity, well, you don't need to freeze anymore the fundings, and you making it a legitimate, while in reality it's a terrorist movement. So 5,000 combatants in Syria. Imagine those combatants going back to China. China has learned from what happened in the Arab Springs. It has learned from what happened in Libya. Libya was a prosperous state. It became a failed state. Syria, they almost managed to destroy Syria. They didn't. Do you think China is going to repeat the same mistake? So this is why China has a very strong national security laws. This is why China is actually going at the root of the problem of extremism. It's poverty. That is the root of the problem. Again, do you think that Americans care about what is happening in Afghanistan? Remember, those days, how many US Marines died? 13. So every single news was about the 13 deaths, but they would never actually tell about how many Afghani died. Can you imagine? It's about the death of US Marines, but they never talked about 70, 80 Afghani that died. Afghanis that actually were US allied. I mean, if they were allowed to fly, it means that somehow they collaborated with the US. So imagine, it's all about American lives, and it's not about the well-being of those countries. Well, tell me an example of those revolutions that actually succeeded and created a better society. There's not a single one, not a single one. And the problem is that there's no retrospection, self-criticizing. I mean, you've done 20 years in Afghanistan. What did it bring to Afghanistan? What did it bring to the war on terror? Actually, if they are going to be much more radicals. You occupy them.
They're still striking ISIS in Afghanistan that was festering there during the US occupation. So what did they accomplish? Even their stated goals?
No, they actually fueled. They fueled. When you kill an Afghani, well, you imagine a mother that that lost her child due to US occupation, well, potentially she could be a terrorist. Again, it's just we need to look at the root of the problems. If on the first place they were not occupied, oppressed, humiliated, because when you have occupation in a country like Afghanistan, you are being humiliated from morning till evening. It's not those photo operation, marketing, when you have those US Marines holding Afghani kids. Look at the root of the problem. The root of the problem. Is there anyone in the US that says, well, why don't we stop those absurd wars? They are not bringing anything, and actually it's spoiling, it's destroying a US economy. That money could go into poor people in the US, and it's destroying countries. And it's just making the elite richer, military industrial complex. It's keeping the same thing over and over. The thing is that it's interesting. Mainstream media, they were telling, why don't we think about those mistakes and never again, but what we're seeing here now, it's the same as after the Vietnam War. Remember, after the Vietnam War, they said, well, never again. We'll never go again, on a war. Useless war. We're doing this again. How many years later? And there's going to be more Afghanistan until well, maybe there's going to be a US collapse, because again, they can fund those wars because there's a US dollar hegemony. You need the money to fund the war, you print money. Until the day that the US dollar is no more the global currency, then you won't be able to do that, because who's funding the war? Indirectly, it's the rest of the world which is funding the war, because the US just need to print US dollar. But there's going to be an end to that. There's now lots of countries are not trading to US dollar. There are cryptocurrencies. There are ways to bypass the US dollar. So now you have a wounded dog that actually doesn't know what to do. It's a vicious circle. You keep on doing the same thing, but at some point it's going to stop.
Absolutely. A lot of really good points there. About poverty, we've looked into U.S. reconstruction efforts, and we saw how they weren't really serious about reconstructing anything. They were dumping money into the police and the military, into contractors, U.S. contractors who just wanted to do the project, get by the bare minimum. They couldn't care less how it turned out, because they were going to go back home. And if whatever it is that they built or whatever project that they started there collapsed, it means another contract for them. So the sabotaging of the reconstruction effort was built into the system the US used to run it. And I don't think that they ever seriously wanted Afghanistan to prosper, because it was an exercise in empire. You want it to be needy. You want your territory to be needy and dependent on you. And this is how Chinese reconstruction differs, because China wants to go into Afghanistan and do business. They're not going to build a road and then leave. They're going to build the road so that they can do business in Afghanistan. They're going to build a factory there. It is in their best interest for the country to be united, stable, and peaceful so they can do business. This is the very essential difference between the way the US and China approaches foreign policy. One other thing, and you said it exactly about the propaganda. Let me just go back to here. Never again after Vietnam, and yet we're doing it again in Afghanistan. We're watching the U.S. foreign policy just completely demented in Afghanistan. We just talked about the ISIS drone strike launched from a state sponsor of ISIS. It couldn't be more demented. And we see them right here in the BBC, already trying to get the next war going, not with Afghanistan, but now with China. They're already using the exact same lies and types of lies and propaganda techniques to get the Western public ready for a confrontation with China. So it's as if nothing was learned in this whole process, and they're just going to rush into the next conflict, which is actually what they're doing. They're just redirecting all of their energy towards China now. for all the reasons you just said, Angelo, because the dollar's days are numbered. They're racing against the clock, and they don't have a plan B. You know, plan B really is the entrenched, decrepit monopolies of the West just collapsing and someone else taking their place. I mean, other companies in the West who understand multipolarism and are ready to constructively work with the rest of the world rather than impose themselves on the rest of the world. That is the actual real plan B. So of course, the people in power now, they're not going to go for that plan B because it means they're going to the dust heap of history and someone else is going to move the West forward into the future. So we are like exactly at 1 hour now, Angelo. Do you have any closing thoughts about any of this?
Well, again, I think one of the root of the problem in the US is the military-industrial complex, and that has hijacked the democracy. When you have senators, congressmen that are heavily funded by the military-industrial complex, they're not answering to the people that elect them. They're answering to the people that fund them. This is the problem. You know, when you are answering to the people that elect you, when in the US you would have a healthcare, universal healthcare, if you were answering to the people that elect you. Now, the problem is that there's this hijacking of democracy, which has become the democracy by the 1%. You have military-industrial complex that is funding heavily those politicians, and they answer to them. So they need to have those endless war to keep transferring this wealth from the people to the military-industrial complex, and it's not going to stop anytime soon.
Unfortunately, and because of that, we will have many episodes of Inflection ahead of us. For everyone who has been watching, thank you so much. Check the video description because all of these links to all of the news stories and everything about the main topic, all of those links will be in the video description below, and it's some extra ones that we didn't get to. Read through all of that. It's very interesting, and if you can understand how this has all unfolded, it'll help you decipher what's coming next. So thank you everyone for joining us, and until next week. And Angelo, thank you very much as always for your expertise. It's greatly appreciated. And until next week, bye for now.
Thank you.